For our third presentation, we're going to be looking at how to get values from the text boxes and then perform some simple arithmetic. As we can see, we've got a few text boxes set up here and two additional buttons, one for subtraction and another one for addition. If you don't know, we brought these text box controls onto the form by dragging them from the Tools window. We called the first text box txt value 1, second text box txt value 2, and the third one txt total, and that's where our result is going to appear after we perform either the subtraction or addition operation. Now we're going to go ahead and click on the button to bring the code behind up. We're going to create a few variables. We're going to create what are called integer variables, and an integer is basically a number. I'm not going to get into describing what else that means, but we're just going to call one iValue in order to reflect our text box, iValue1, and initialize that to 0. And the second one will be iValue2. Now it's a good idea to create variables that have a similar name. So iValue1 will correspond to txt value1 and iValue2 will correspond to txt value2. Once we start writing more code, it'll be easier to know what our intent was and which variables correspond to which controls. Our third variable I'm going to call iTotal, and that's going to correspond to txt total, our text box. So I've done that, and now we're going to get the value of that first text box, and we need to convert that to an integer value because it's coming in as a string. So we're going to use toInt32, function of the convert class, the value of txt value1 text, and then we're going to set iValue2 to convert integer 32. That will correspond to our second text box. Next, we're going to perform our subtraction operation. So we're going to subtract iValue2 from iValue1. And store the result in iTotal. Then we're going to go ahead and set our text output text box to iTotal, and we're going to need to convert that back into a string value. So we'll use the toString function of that integer. Okay, so that should be that. Go ahead and save it, build it. And then execute the application and test it out. So let's put in 1 in the first text box, 2 in the second one. Actually, let's make that 10. And we'll click on subtract, and we get the value 8. That's actually the wrong text box. I wanted to use the other one, and I forgot its name. So let's take a look at our properties window. And the name of that text box is text total, not text output. So we'll go back to our source and set this to txt total. And I should have seen that in the code because that didn't match my integer variable, which is called iTotal, not iOutput. So we can go ahead and build that again, save it, build it. And then run the application again to test it. $10, 2, and we've got 8, which appears here now. Now for our next example, we're going to look at implementing the add click button. Now I've changed the code a little bit here because if we were to enter non-numeric values, we're going to get an error using that subtract function. So I'm going to walk through the code here. First of all, I'm going to show you that if I were to enter a non-numeric value here, such as a letter A or a character such as a $, and I try to execute this function, I'm going to get an error. And the error is system format exception, input string was not in a correct format. So I'm going to take a look at this next function, and I created a breakpoint here. We can also bring up our debug watch window so we can take a look at the values as they come in. And we're going to add our first text box to the watch window. And our second text box. Now let's go ahead and run this application and then step into this function and see what kind of values we're getting, executing one line of code at a time. So if I enter in a non-numeric value in the first text box and a valid value in the second one, and then click on add, come into this function and we break on the first instruction. So if we look at our debug window, our watch window, we'll see that the values in these text boxes are A and 1. Now this first if condition should fail, and it's using an integer 32 try parse function. And what that does is it tries to get a valid integer from this text box. We've got an additional function called trim, which is going to take out any spaces because we want to ignore those. And ultimately, if this succeeds, it's going to output that value into our iValue1 variable, which corresponds to txt value 1. So let's go ahead and step that by pressing our F10 function key, and we'll see it walking through one step at a time. So now when it goes and executes this line of code, the if condition is going to return a false, and we're not going to make it into the second if condition, which is inside the first. So it won't run the rest of the code in here. Now, we want both of these text boxes to have valid numeric values before we actually try to perform our addition operation and then set the total text box to our result. So this will succeed since the second text box has the value 1 in it, but the first one's going to fail, so we're not going to execute the second one. So as we see, we've come to the end of our function, and if we continue running this, it'll just bring up the form and it won't fill in that last text box with our total value. So it just basically stopped. Okay, now if I were to change this around and run this again, I could see that the first try parse is going to succeed this time with that value because there's a valid number in there, the number 1. And so it does attempt to run this second try parse. And the second try parse will fail now. So either way, we avoid any errors. Now if I enter in 2 valid numbers and try to add them together, we'll see that the first condition executes correctly and the values outputted into our iValue1 integer, which now contains the number 2. And then our second line of code nested inside that if condition passes that test, and we have the value 1 in iValue2. So now we can perform our addition operation because we have 2 valid values. So we do that and our iTotal becomes 3, and then we output that into our total text box. Go ahead and run that without stepping through the code, and we see that value 3. So I can go back and remove this breakpoint and try something else, and we've got 11, so it works.